It's nice to meet everybody here. I very much appreciate that. My presentation today was originally called Documenting the Future, a Human Imperative. And I actually kind of want to change that a little bit. I'd like to go back to its original Latin idea of documentary, or where documentary came from, because I actually don't like the term documentary anymore. Documentary has such a thin meaning. It's only come into an existence in the early part of the 20th century, and it's been really kind of attached to filmmaking and film presentation and being able to tell these visual stories. I like the original definition, the Latin, much better. And this is kind of where I come from. The Latin, where documentary comes from, is documentum. It's about lesson, instruction, and warning. You know, it was used to, to talk about teaching. Whether it was oral presentation, telling a story of what may have taken place, or writing something down, or even, as early as cave paintings. The idea of documenting something and having us or having someone else be aware of what was taking place other than that person. Can you imagine prior to cameras, prior to, digital cameras, camera phones, people actually had to convey ideas, prior to print, prior to, industrial type, prior to, certain tools that were available to, pass on information. The main thing was oral history, stories, and then when people didn't have anyone around and they still wanted to pass on that information, to provide a lesson or a warning, they would document that. Again, write something on a rock or a wall or something along those lines. We've kind of bastardized the idea of documentary, and what we think of documentary. And we're really kind of, we're into entertainment. We're into, titillating ourselves with certain kinds of sound bites or certain types of information, which doesn't really give us a full understanding of what really is going on around us. And there's all kinds of, I looked up, the term documentary, and I looked up, all of its different iterations, trying to understand, where I fit. And where I fit is, I like the idea of the truth, the lesson, the warning, the ability to, in essence, capture anything and everything that's taking place as a snapshot in time, to share that with somebody else. Now, this isn't necessarily the documentary that we're most familiar with, but we do have documentary around that has been very powerful. Some of the current examples, for instance, is The Cove. That was a very, powerful film, about dolphin slaughter that's been playing this year. Another film is about Food Inc., talking about how we deal with, how we deal with food and what we, look at as food. And when you have really important documentaries, it can be very powerful. It can change things. And there is a responsibility, I think, in terms of, from everybody's perspective, in terms of documenting ourselves. I think it's important for us I think for me, it's important for me to believe that I am in a place and time where evolution is possible, for instance. This one project that I made, this An American Opera, which has me headlong into doing things for a purpose and a cause. It tells me that when I look into the depth of how we interact with animals, at least here in the United States, we can actually pinpoint if evolution to us is a progressive, compassionate, component of what we do and how we interact with all types of species, all kinds of animals, If we consider that evolutionary, then we can understand that over the last 100 years or so, at least in our country, that how we interact with our animals, we are evolving. 100 years ago, we looked at animals specifically as protection or guidance or more utilitarian than we do now, which we look at them as family members. We dress our pets. There's companies that provide very expensive urns for the ashes of your pets. People look at them as family members. And I think there is a lot of compassion and understanding that's starting to come out of that. Well, if we think about this, well, then we can say, if in this instance we look at this as a prospect of our own evolution, then we are evolving. One of the earliest films that was made, early on when films came about, Thomas Edison, Lumiere's, the process was extremely cumbersome. You could only rip maybe a half minute or a minute's worth of film at any time. You couldn't move your cameras very easily. So it was very hard to really have them do much more than document very specific small slices of life. A loading dock at a train station, or boat coming into the boat dock. People who had never seen pictures of things moving before were just unbelievably fascinated. Well, one of the most important early uses was a surgeon who used it to, in essence, deconstruct his work and what he was doing as a surgeon so he could understand how to be a surgeon better. And his surviving work, there's a couple of volumes that are left, have become very important pieces of work. He was documenting this between the 1890s and 1906 when he passed, and some of his early works are still available. And this person, quite frankly, said that he learned so much about what he was doing wrong technically. It was the best teacher that he had to be able to look at himself. And I believe that if we look at documenting ourselves with what I arguably would say is the most powerful tool that we have at our hands now, the moving, the opportunity to capture the moving image, then I think we have a huge opportunity to exponentially evolve.